All right. So today we're going to talk about the college consortium that is tonight at Schreiber. So this is a time for students to really talk to admissions reps, and there's about 60 schools coming, so it's a really good time for you to get as much information as you can. So first, we're going to go through the logistics of what's going to happen tonight, and you may have seen it in the newsletter. Your student may have come home and spoken about it, but we're going to go through what the logistics looks like, and then we're going to go like, what does it take to prepare for the college consortium tonight if you wanted to. So there's a question, is the college consortium intended for juniors or sophomores as well? So while it is guided towards juniors because they'll be starting their college process, in the coming months, anyone can attend the college consortium. So if you are a sophomore parent and, you want to get a jumper, you want to talk to, colleges to kind of get an idea going into junior year, you're absolutely able to. Give me 1 second. Okay. So you're absolutely able to. So it's really for anyone who wants to, come and talk to colleges. So another question is, are they held at this time only every year or more often? So that's a really good question. So the Big College Consortium that's at night is held around this time every year, usually for juniors in their spring. So that way, they can get some information before going into their senior year. But what we do have in the fall is we do have individual schools come in and meet with our students, as well as mini college fairs during lunch periods. So students do have the opportunity during the fall to meet with schools during their lunch periods in a fair-like atmosphere as well. So good question. Okay, so what is going to happen tonight? So the college consortium starts at 6:30 in the auditorium. And the auditorium, what's going to be held in the auditorium is an admissions rep panel. So there will be admissions representatives from all different schools, and they will be answering questions that will be moderated by this director, our director of guidance. And there'll be all different schools will be answering, and they're going to be asking the basic questions about college. There may be some time at the end, that goes till about 7:20 or so. There may be some time at the end to ask questions, but good news, even if there's not, all of the admissions representatives that are sitting on the panel will be in the actual college fair starting around 7:30. So after the panel happens in the auditorium, everyone will go down to the gymnasium for the actual college fair. And like I said, if you have a question for one of those reps and you don't have the time or are unable to ask it, then they will be at a table in the gymnasium, so you can find them then. The college fair in the gymnasium will last from about 7:30 till 9 p.m. And that is when admissions representatives are set up on tables, and they have all of the information about their school. Sometimes they'll have some swag from their school. Some of them will collect information, like if you come visit them. Some of them will collect your students' contact information. And some of them will say that that is considered demonstrated interest. So if you haven't heard that term before, demonstrated interest is when schools look at it differently, but sometimes when you fill out contact information, when you visit them at a college fair, when you go on a tour, when you visit them on campus, they kind of keep track of how many times you make connections with them. Some schools track it, some schools don't. So that would also be another question to ask them tonight, but you'll have the opportunity to ask your direct questions to the reps and get some information about the school. So really quick, should parents of juniors attend? So parents are absolutely invited. It's a personal preference, but I always suggest if parents can attend, it's a really good idea. That way you and your student are hearing the same thing and can ask questions. And that way you and your student you can help your student plan and get the information that they need and help them stay organized as well. The other question is there a list of what schools plan to be there? Yeah, so you should have received the Vikings newsletter for April from Mr. Rector. And in that newsletter, there is where it says click here underneath the poster for the college fair. There's a list of colleges. So you can see what colleges are going to be there. And that's going to be important in our conversation moving forward. All right, so that is the logistics of kind of what tonight is going to look like. Are there any questions before we move on with how to prepare for tonight? Oh, so Ms. Director also wrote in the chat that the list was also shared yesterday via email to everyone. So everyone should have the list in a couple different places. And if your student wants to see the list, it's also posted on our guidance bulletin board outside our office as well. So there's a couple different places to access the list. Okay. All right. So how do you prepare for a college fair? For some of you, this may be the first college fair that you've ever attended. This may be the start of your college search process. And that's okay. That's what this is here for. This is why we bring schools in, so you can really begin to talk to a lot of schools in one place. That is the beauty of a college fair. Sometimes it can get overwhelming when you're trying to figure out which schools to visit. And there probably will still be college visits in your future, but this is a time when reps come to us and you can talk to a lot of different reps at the same time. All right, so how do you prepare? So the first thing that I always like to talk about when I talk about college fairs is making a plan for the fair. So what's nice about the way we do our college fair is you kind of get eased in with the panel and listening to the admissions rep.
No. But I don't know.
I'm just going to remind everyone.
I thought no one might.
Please make sure you're muted. But the first thing I'd like to say is make a game plan. So sometimes it can be overwhelming when you walk into a college fair just because there are a lot of different schools. There's going to be a lot of people. So the reason the list is so important is you want to kind of run down that list and see what schools you're interested in. And kind of make a game plan. If like on your top 5, do you definitely want to talk to these top schools? Or you make a list of 10 schools and say, I definitely want to make a list of 10 schools, and then whatever happens after that happens. But going in with a plan and knowing which schools you definitely want to speak to is always a good idea, because then you can navigate, through that aspect and kind of have a checklist to talk to the schools you want to. Some of the things that you want to talk about too is one of your students' dream schools may be there, but you have done so much research or maybe already visited the school and maybe you know enough about that school already and you want to skip that and talk to other schools that you haven't talked about. So it's really a strategy and it's a personal strategy, depending on what happens when you go to the college fair and how you want to navigate it. But it's always a good idea to know who will be there so you can look at to it prior. The next thing, which I'm sure you have heard about before, is asking great questions. Some of you may not have met these admissions reps before. Your student may not have met these admissions reps before. A lot of admissions reps that are sent to these college fairs are likely the Long Island reps, not always, but sometimes, and depending on how their admissions office in their school is structured. But you may be meeting tonight with the very person who is going to read your student's application. So you want to make sure that you're leaving a lasting impression. And one of the ways to do that is asking a really great question. Our recommendation is, there's a lot of information out there now on websites and different ways to find on social media, things about the colleges. So we just say that, you shouldn't really ask anything that you can find on the website. Try to really, if you've researched the school, ask things like, what do students like most about your school? Or what kind of students are happiest at your school? Things that you probably cannot get from the website, you want to hear the admissions rep say. The other question that I really like is, there's two of them. How do you make an admissions decision? What do you take into account when admissions? And they'll really share with you, if they do like the holistic review, if, the GPA is really important, or if SAT, ACT scores are really important, they'll be able to share with you kind of what the school focuses on when they make an admissions decision. It's not a complete review, and they're not going to tell you on the spot if they think you'll get in, but they're going to share with you, what they value in an applicant. So that's always good to know if you plan on applying to that school. One of the other questions that I really like, when talking to admissions rep, is how would you describe the academic pressure and the workload of the school? A lot of times we're focused on, environment, and if they have the student's major and what that looks like. But some things that we sometimes forget is, what does the academic pressure and workload look like? And I think that's really important to understand, when a student gets there, what is their schooling going to look like? The other one is, and the one last one that I really like is, are you able to give me a few names of students that I can speak with? A lot of times a student-to-student interaction or a current student there is really powerful. And they'll share things with you from a student perspective that your student could get a lot out of. So when you're looking at that, I would just kind of write down, a couple of questions that you can take with you. And again, that's your strategy too, however you want to do it. My personal preference is to ask a couple of the same questions to every school and take good notes. So that way, when you go home, you can talk about what you learned from each school, and you can talk about, you ask the same question. So what was the answer from this school to this school to this school? And you can kind of compare and contrast and see what the best fit is for your student. Okay, so are there any questions? Question is mainly for juniors. So, like I said prior, that yes, this is geared towards juniors because they'll be starting their college process soon. But if you are a sophomore or even a freshman and want to get a jump, your student is a sophomore or freshman and want to get a jump on the college process, they absolutely can come speak to the reps tonight. This is open to all, but geared towards juniors because they are starting the college process. Okay. So the other thing is, staying organized throughout the fair. So that's the other thing that we don't talk enough about. How do you stay organized through the fair? There's a lot of flags that's given out. There's a lot of information that's given out. There's a lot of brochures and pamphlets and, a bunch of other things that schools give out, pens, to be memorable. So my recommendation is to either bring like a folder where you can flip all the brochures in, or a bag that you can just throw everything in. So that way you can keep organized and you're not, walking around trying to hold everything and it's falling as you're talking to admissions reps. And also always bring a pen and a little notepad. Because like I said, as you're asking those questions or as the admissions reps are telling you something, in the moment, you're like, I'll remember what they say. And then when you get home, a lot of times you're like, I have no idea what they said. So it's just a good idea to kind of, even if you don't want to take notes as you're speaking to the reps, after you speak to a rep and then move away from that table, if you just take like, 30 to 60 seconds and write down everything that rep said real quick before moving on to the next table while it's fresh in your mind. Again, that's personal strategy, but a way to do it. But I highly, highly recommend notes. And I highly recommend, either taking a bag or a folder or something to put everything in to kind of stay organized throughout the night. So there's a couple of questions. Do the same schools come each year? We have a lot of the same schools that come back year after year, but no, it's open to all schools. So this will change every year. There's a couple of schools that change every year, but we do have a lot of the same schools that do seem to come to our college fair. And will there be different schools attending the mini fairs in the fall? Good question. So some of them are the same, some of them are different. So I know that's not like a great answer, but there's a wide variety of schools. And those lists for the mini fairs will also be posted in the fall. So again, kind of like tonight, you'll be able to kind of research and help your students decide if they want to attend that mini fair in the fall during their lunch period and what schools they want to stop by and talk to. Okay. Is there any other questions before we move on about the college fair, attendees, organization, questions? That's a great question. So there was a question, should my student ask the question or can the parent ask the question? So that's a really, really good question. So admissions reps like to hear from the students. So if possible, you know, there's always a time and a place for the parent to ask their questions, but if possible, you know, when they're asking about student life and, you know, what kind of students is the college looking for and what students are the happiest at your school, if your student could ask the question, they're the ones applying to that school with that admissions rep. So if they could leave a lasting impression on that admissions rep, that would probably be the best strategy to have them ask it. You can help them stay organized and keep notes and stand there, you know, and listen to the response to help them process the response. But if they could actually ask the question, I think that would probably be best. And then someone asks, is the lunch period long enough for something like that? I'm guessing the mini fairs, we're reverting back to the mini fairs. And yeah, they'll when we do the mini fairs, they're there during all the lunch periods. So sometimes students will have you know, multiple periods off during that time so they can attend however long they want. But sometimes it is just a time where they go in and stop in and talk to two schools. So, you know, again, that is also kind of strategy and something that you want to look at before, like what schools are coming and what schools you want to speak to. But yeah, generally students have enough time to navigate that and talk to reps during that time. Okay. So we've talked a lot about, you know, organization and, you know, researching the schools you want to speak to, coming up with questions and, you know, really getting information that you need. But sometimes you'll have about 5 to 10 schools that you want to speak to, and you'll get through that in maybe an hour, you know, depending on how busy the tables are of the schools you want to speak to. And then you'll have like a half hour left. So the next point is like, don't be afraid to kind of go off script and then just, you know, walk up to schools that maybe you're not so familiar with, you or your student. This is an opportunity where reps are coming to tell them about their school, and they'd be more than happy to speak with you if one, maybe you've never heard of their school, or two, you didn't do a lot of research and maybe this is an opportunity for you to get some information about this school. So I say if you have made it through all of your strategy and made it through the schools that you want to speak to, feel free to approach schools that you're unfamiliar with. That's what the reps are there for. You also never know what kind of school you're going to find. If you're unfamiliar with a school, it may have a lot of points that your student is looking for in a school. So I would definitely try to talk to them. And, you know, like I said, try not to use your whole time to hit every school that you want to. Leave some time for exploration, because there may be schools that maybe just by name on the list, you're like, I don't know them. But then as you're walking around, you're like, oh, they're handing this out or they're talking about this, and that may be of interest to us. So definitely leave some time to talk to those schools as well. And my last point today is really to talk about like getting the admissions contact information and then how to use it going forward. So it's always important. A lot of admissions reps will have business cards or different ways to get you their contact information, but it's always important to leave the conversation with their contact information. And there's a couple of questions that you do want to ask the admissions rep as well about that. So, you know, first and foremost, obviously, like I said, what is the best way to contact them? Most of them will say email, as most of them are on the road quite often, and it's easier for them to check email than a phone. But some of them will say, you know, give me a call. So that's something that's a preference to the admissions rep. The other question you want to ask while getting their contact information is, are they the Long Island rep? And if they're not, you know, who is the Long Island rep? And can I have their contact information as well? And the other piece of it is, or do you have reps for region areas? Some schools will say, no, they don't have a specific Long Island rep. So then they would be your contact because that's who you met at the college fair. But other schools will say, yes, we have a Long Island rep and here's their information as well. So it's always important to know who you're speaking with in the admissions department and, you know, how to move forward when talking to someone in their area. After you gather their contact information, you know, what do you do with it? You know, I've collected all this information. I talked to them at the college fair. Now what? Sometimes, you know, you'll be thinking about the school a couple of weeks later and you'll say, oh, I wish I asked this question. Email them. They'd be more than happy to answer it. Or sometimes, you know, you're thinking about coming to campus and you're not sure when, or like I said, you want to see if you can meet up with a current student to talk. So any of those questions, they'd be more than happy to help you with. Also, if it's a school that tracks demonstrated interest, or if it's a school where the Long Island rep reads those applications, you also want to make contact so you have a lasting impression and they remember your name. And that way you can really develop a relationship with that person. So that's, you know, as far as like the contact information and all of that. So just to kind of recap like where we were, you know, you want to obviously look at the college list. You want to research, you want to make a plan. You want to ask great questions to the college. The big one, I think, in the middle is really staying organized. So whether that be with, you know, a folder or a bag, and bring a notepad, definitely take notes so that way you remember what each college does. And then don't be afraid to explore and go off script and let your students talk to schools that maybe you never heard of, or maybe you've heard of them, but they weren't originally on the student's list for whatever reason. See if you can gather some information and then get the admissions rep contact information so you can use it at a later point. The question in the chat is, do you know which schools have demonstrated interest? It's a good question. There is not a hard and fast rule when it comes to demonstrated interest, but schools would be more than happy to share with you if they track demonstrated interest. The advice I give to students is, if they're asking you or they're allowing you to fill out, you know, a contact card, fill it out. If they send you an email, open it. Even if you don't know if they track demonstrated interest, those are things that often go into demonstrated interest. So just do that for every school and you'll be covered. Some schools though, so if you visit some schools at their table tonight, that can be a question that you ask, because then maybe if your student is really interested in that school, that would be a school that you prioritize to go visit because that's a track and demonstrate interest. So there's not a list of exactly who does it, but I always tell students to just kind of treat every school as if they track demonstrate interest. I hope that answered that question. Are most schools from New York State or outside? I'm guessing for the college fair tonight, there's a good mix. So there's definitely some SUNY schools in there and some New York State schools, but there's also a lot of different schools from, different states as well. And then the next question is, are students excused from sports to attend? That's something that I would talk to their coach about. I cannot speak on behalf of the sports program, so I'm not sure about that. All right, are there any additional questions before we end today? All right, well, thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you all there tonight. And if not, there's definitely other opportunities for students to talk to admissions reps here at Schreiber. Thank you.